This weekend for the US Grand Prix in Austin, several teams will be rocking a one-off livery for the occasion. But the one that's been generating the most retweets and likes and just, well, general discussion on social media is the one that Williams will be running. The blue car will have, well, a bit less blue on it this weekend. I haven't got a copyright-free picture I can use, but I'm sure you've seen it on social media in the last couple of days. Follow me on Twitter and I'll have retweeted it. But the section on top of the nose that is blue has now been replaced with white, and the giant A that is part of the Atlassian logo will also be white, along with some white swatches on the top of the side pods that run to the rear of the car. It's become a very popular livery, one that people are saying should be the Williams livery from now on, because cars need to look pretty, apparently. I'm not bothered, I just want Williams cars to be fast again. Come on, Williams. It's all been done as a throwback to the BMW colours of the early 2000s. According to the Williams website, the livery is a representation of how Williams and Atlassian have survived and thrived in the face of relentless change since 2002. Doing so through harnessing the power of teamwork and how both are determined to return the team to glory by pushing forward together. The livery was unveiled by Carlos Sainz, Atlassian co-founder and CEO Mike Cannon-Brookes and Juan Pablo Montoya. Why the 2002 livery? Because that's the year that Atlassian was founded. Atlassian is a software company that makes things like Jira and Trello, which is something I didn't know until I googled it. Hopefully it's something that you've learned today as well. The BMW years were a return to some sort of form for Williams. Investment from BMW allowed for Frank to remain decently funded after losing the Rothmans money at the end of 1999. And before I get piled on with people saying that it was Winfield and not Rothmans, Winfield was a Rothmans brand. But Rothmans was then bought by British American Tobacco during 1999, and with BAT having their own team by this point, they didn't want their brands on a rival's car, so they pulled the plug. But the BMW investment was a great boost to Frank and his team. Although there were two small problems with it all though. Number one being that while incredibly powerful, the BMW engines tended to go pop, ending chances of wins or good results. And while Juan Pablo Montoya came close to the title in 2003, being controversially penalised close to the end of the season, the relentless dominance by Michael Schumacher and Ferrari, and the McLarens being a tiny bit more reliable, meant that Williams' best result in this time frame was second, twice. First in 2002 behind the all-dominant Ferrari F2002, and again in 2003, which was a much closer season overall, if not for the spat over how legal the Michelins were. But in 2004, much like in 1998, the decline started again. The 2004 FW27, otherwise known as the Walrus nose, was, well, it was a choice. Williams had tried to exploit airflow under the nose, a design put forth by the late Antonia Terzi. While she had joined the team from Ferrari in 2003, she had more freedom with the FW26 and tried something new. It was all to get as much air under the car as possible to the side pods and the rear of the car so the diffuser could work its magic. But not only was the Ferrari F2004 so damn good, the Williams was not particularly great. Well, it was okay in testing, but once up against everybody else, it wasn't all that. The BAR was better than the Williams, and the Renaults were making progress, and McLaren were just about hanging on. The car had too much weight in the nose, and it was unstable. They put a more normal nose on for the Hungarian Grand Prix of that year and just revised the car in general to be the FW26B, but they still finished fourth. And I've done a video on the BMW years in full. The general consensus of that time is that the partnership had the potential to be better than it was. It just wasn't. But at the end of the 2004 season, tensions between Frank Williams and BMW were rising. BMW were blaming Williams for building bad cars, because the BMW engine by itself was a warp drive that Catherine Janeway would struggle to keep up with. Warp 9.975? Rookie numbers. But it was just unreliable. Montoya could have been considered to have been robbed of a title by that dubious penalty at Indy in 2003, but the engine failure at Suzuka didn't help things either. Williams could have at least had the Constructors' title in 2003, if not for that. But for 2005, that was the final nail in the coffin for the relationship between BMW and Sir Frank Williams, this being when the FW27 hit the track. The first thing about the team for 2005 is that there was an all-new look. Montoya had left the team because he was off to McLaren to drive the glass cannon that was the MP420. And yes, it was a glass cannon. There's no need to get upset. Ralf Schumacher, meanwhile, was going to be collecting a very nice paycheck from Toyota, a deal that dumbfounded the F1 world because it was a lot of money to be paying. The joke was that Toyota thought they'd hired the other Schumacher. Wasn't there a football team that did that recently? They thought they were getting the late Diogo Jota, but they ended up getting somebody else. But I digress. The car, however, was a little like the previous offering once they ditched the so-called Walrus nose, although the front wing had to be raised slightly to conform to the new FIA rules of that year, as the speeds attained through 2004, including Montoya's then lap record at Monza, had become a bit too much for the FIA to be comfortable with. So, to reduce front-end downforce, the front wings were raised. But the loophole in that rule was only the end plates had to go up. So the teams all started using a U-channel in the middle as there was no rule regarding that, so they could at least gain back some of the lost downforce. A single keel was adopted rather than the twin keel setup used previously. Keels were basically used to just act as some bodywork to attach the suspension arms to, and Sam Michael revealed that a single keel was better for stiffness than a twin one. The side pods were adapted from the B-Spec 2004 car in that they were undercut and then shrunk down, as well as lowered, with the diffuser ramping up in what was typical of a Williams car from that time. To help with the rear aero efficiency, some small winglets were added to the back of the engine cover, with some extra bits and pieces added onto the car to help with the cooling for the BMW engine, which was going to run down on power for the opening few races of the season, and then they turn it up once they knew that it was working properly. Mark Webber was signed to replace Montoya, but when the car was launched in the January of 2005, Williams hadn't announced their second driver yet. Gilles Forever on the Autosport forums was quite worried, saying, "This is Williams we're on about. They're supposed to be a top 4 team." And then the speculation was running over who could be Webber's partner. Webber had done some good stuff in the Jags in previous years, but he wasn't considered to be a game changer. So names like Jacques Villeneuve were thrown around as potential drivers to come in. Coulthard was also touted as potentially returning because his Red Bull drive wasn't yet secure. Jenson Button had signed a contract to drive for the team, but the FIA had determined that he still had to honour his contract with BAR. The other name thrown into the hat was Nick Heidfeld. And Heidfeld was actually signed to replace Schumacher. It seemed logical given that the Germans were supplying the engines to the team, so a German driver in the sort of Anglo-German team made perfect sense. And the reaction online was whelmed. It was mostly labelled disappointing, with people hoping and praying that the car was good enough that Webber and Heidfeld could look half decent because, well, their stock wasn't exactly high. Webber and Heidfeld were mid-grid runners at best. Solid mid-grid runners, it has to be said, but neither of them had really broken through to be a top-level driver. There was also the worry that Williams might have reverted to a far more conservative car, considering how badly the Tusks had gone. That, and because the McLaren, BAR and Renault all looked more aggressive. But the fact of the matter is, looks don't win championships. The MP420 is proof of that. But initially, the doom and gloom on the internet was largely shut down after qualifying for the Australian Grand Prix that year. Fisichella's Renault was on pole with the Toyota of Trulli in second, but who's that in third? It's Mark Webber's Williams. Now don't be alarmed by the qualifying times here and the gaps. This was the first attempt at the very short-lived aggregate qualifying system, where everybody did 2 one-lap qualifying runs. The 2 times were then added together, and the fastest of those added times is on pole. So Webber, Fisichella and Trulli did their runs on a track that was a bit drier compared to the laps done by Ralph, Barrichello and Alonso. But if you're Williams, you'll take that all day every day. But Webber actually ended that first race of the season in 5th come the end. Barrichello and Alonso made their way forward to make it to the podium, with Heidfeld retiring after the Michael squeezed him into turn 3, with Nick getting on the grass, not being able to brake, and then clanging into the Ferrari. Points on the board early on. But was this going to be normal for Williams, or will these results be few and far between? Well, actually, the results got a little better for the team when they went to Malaysia for round 2. Heidfeld was on the podium, with it being Webber's turn to retire on this occasion. He was involved in a collision with Fisichella's Renault that eliminated both cars, but Heidfeld scored a podium, which was partially shushing the doom and gloom merchants on the Autosport forums. But when you look at the Constructors' Championship at this point, Williams were in 5th, because while they had a podium to their name, they weren't scoring as many big points as the likes of Renault or getting both drivers to the end, like Red Bull. After Malaysia, the car settled into this sort of lower half of the points paying positions routine. Remember, in these days, it was the points down to 8th, so 10, 8, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The 2 cars were finishing in the lower part of the top 8, getting points, but not necessarily a lot of them. Webber was 6th in Bahrain, the hottest race on record as it so happens, and then took 7th at Imola before getting another 6th at Barcelona. Heidfeld retired again at Bahrain, his BMW going pop, but at Monaco, the two cars finished on the podium. Webber was third, but Heidfeld, second. Webber started third for this race, with Heidfeld down in sixth. The Williams cars had been the beneficiaries of a strategy blunder by Renault, as they pitted their cars under the safety car when Albert spun his Minardi, with Schumacher ploughing into Coulthard as the Red Bull pulled up to avoid it. Heidfeld had actually overtaken Alonso's heavily fueled Renault on track, with a move into the chicane, with Webber following suit a few laps later. The car's imperfections had sort of been negated here, it seems. So what exactly were the problems with the FW27? How long have you got? It's actually not that long of a list, but it was enough to make the car not as good as everybody else's. Even with the new keel, the new aero parts and the other changes from the 2004 car, it wasn't handling particularly well. Williams had not adapted well to the new aero rules for 2004, but they did have some mechanical grip to make up for it, as shown at Monaco, where the Renaults actually destroyed their tyres. Something you didn't want to do in a year where you weren't allowed to change them. More to the point, the BMW in the back of the car was thirsty and prone to overheating. Williams would put less fuel in the car for qualifying because in those days you qualified on your race fuel. So lower fuel loads meant a bit more pace for qualifying, but a shorter first stint. So the thirstiness of the engine limited Williams' strategies and increased their pit stop times, as they needed more fuel to do 20 laps than other cars did. And while the car did have a good amount of mechanical grip, they suffered right rear tyre failures in Turkey. The cooling problems were actually becoming a very big issue. During the French Grand Prix, the car had become so hot, Webber burned his hip. For that French Grand Prix, Williams brought an upgrade package. Heidfeld ran it, but he found that it wasn't any better than what he was already running. He used it at Silverstone for Friday practice and hated it, so the team had to ship a previous spec car out from the factory in Grove, put the engine and gearbox from the other car in, and then get it all turned around in time for running on Saturday. Heidfeld ran the old car through the Silverstone weekend, while Webber had the new one. So it was essentially a back-to-back test of the two specifications, although I can't find out what they ended up running. But Heidfeld did manage to get a pole position though, this pole position coming at the European Grand Prix at the Nürburgring, the race that was famous for Kimi Raikkonen's suspension failing in spectacular fashion late on in the race, this being because he'd flat spotted one of his tyres, and the rules were no tyre changing, so the vibration just shook the car apart essentially. Heidfeld had dropped to third in that race, but Raikkonen's retirement meant that he inherited second. That would be the last podium the car achieved all year. But the second half of the season was nowhere near as consistent as the first half of it. While Webber had been third in Canada, the two cars didn't start the US Grand Prix because of Tiregate. After that came the bulk of the European season, where the cars had utterly woeful performances. 12th and 14th at Monaco, 11th and 12th at Silverstone, not classified and 11th at Hockenheim, but they did score points at the Hungarian Grand Prix. Although Hungary, like Monaco, is a mechanical grip track, so that might have helped them. Turkey, they both retired, but Heidfeld then had to pull out of the Italian Grand Prix because he'd been suffering from headaches following a crash he'd had at Monza the previous week. His replacement for the rest of the season would be Antonio Pizzonia, so Webber was reunited with his old Jaguar partner for the final part of the season. Pizzonia had been at Williams since 2004, and had been drafted in for 4 races following Ralf Schumacher's shunt at Indianapolis, where he injured his back. For his first race back, Pizzonia managed to bring the car home in 7th, with Webber languishing down in 14th, in a race that was the first time that all the drivers had finished a Grand Prix since the 1961 Dutch Grand Prix. Excluding the 2005 race at Indianapolis, obviously. Webber was 4th in Belgium, not classified in Brazil, and then ended the season with a 4th place in Japan and a 7th place in China. That being the last point scores for Williams that season. It was a stressful season for Williams and BMW, as Williams ended the year on 66 points split between Webber, Heidfeld and Pizzonia, and they finished 5th overall, 1 place down on 2004. They were 22 points behind Toyota and only 28 points ahead of BAR. This being when you factor in that BAR had been disqualified from 1 race, banned for 2 races, and missed the US Grand Prix. You'd have thought that being on Michelin's might have helped Williams in 2005, but overall the quality of the car was just not there. With Ferrari having issues through the 2005 season, that might have helped Williams out as well, giving them a leg up to try and get back into that top 3 again. But there was another team coming in to halt that attempt. Renault. They and Fernando Alonso were just too much for everybody else that season, despite the McLaren being on paper the faster car, but held back with its various problems with the engines, the gearboxes and, well, general reliability. Ridiculously fast, but was picking up engine penalties seemingly every race, as by this time an engine had to last 2 race weekends, this being 1 weekend longer than the 2004 regulations. The FIA actually had to step in with this rule because some teams, particularly BAR, decided to just pull their cars when they knew they weren't getting points. So under the rules and a loophole in the rules, it meant they could get a free engine change. But the FIA said, nice try. Even with McLaren's issues, Williams could not make those inroads into the top 3 again. Ferrari, despite having their initial problems in the beginning phase of the season, managed to find something in the middle part as the bulk of the European season took place, with Schumacher and Barrichello scoring regular points and taking what could be considered the free 1-2 at Indianapolis, when none of the Michelin teams were going to score because, well, they didn't start. That middle part of the season with the poor races in France, Britain, Germany and Turkey didn't help Williams at all, and once they figured the car out, they were back to where they were previously. The car sort of stayed still in terms of positions rather than nudging its way forward. And actually, looking at things, that Ferrari didn't seem that bad in the second part of the season. And have I done a video on that Ferrari? I mean, I've done a video on the rule changes, I know that, but have I done a deep dive on the actual car? I'll have to look at that video on the rules and see if it's worth doing one, because we need to see if that Ferrari was as bad as people think it was. But the relationship between Williams and BMW couldn't be rescued. Like mentioned, BMW thought their engines were fine, and that it was Williams' problem that they were overheating. At the same time, BMW was blaming Williams for making poor handling cars, with Williams being, yeah, we know, but hey! BMW even attempted to buy out the team, but Frank being Frank, he wasn't just going to hand over his life's work. So BMW decided to take their euros elsewhere and ended up buying Peter Sauber's team instead. Although, BMW did end up doing one other thing through the course of the 2005 season. In September, they took one of their academy drivers and put him in a Williams car for a test session at Jerez. That driver was Sebastian Vettel. The Williams FW27 was the last of a line of cars from an era that should have been absolutely mega, but it just never was. Williams would switch to Cosworth engines for 2006, before taking on Toyota engines from 2007 until the end of 2009. Williams would score a podium in 2008 and would get a win in 2012, but the Monaco Grand Prix of 2005 was the last time that both cars were seen on the podium until the 2014 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Although, in 2025, Carlos Sainz did bring back some of that glory, getting a podium in Baku. It does leave you wondering what might have happened if things had gone just, well, ever so slightly differently. Like I said, that era should have been absolutely amazing. It should have been a great partnership. The brains of Williams, who managed to do things on sort of a less budget compared to everybody else, and the might of BMW with these incredibly powerful engines. In fact, what if Williams still had Adrian Newey at that particular time? But as it was, we were all left underwhelmed, and that final Williams powered by that final BMW engine was only one word: anonymous. So then a look at the Williams FW27, the final BMW engined Williams from a time where we were just left a bit, well, underwhelmed in what could have been delivered. If this has been an interesting look through the motorsport history books, then do give the video a like so I know a good job was done, and for more stuff from the channel, get subscribed and also get the bell on so you never miss out on anything else that I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the mad lads over at Patreon who continue to support me at a more personal level, and if you want to join the people on your screen who help with any expenses I have to incur through running this channel, there's a link to Patreon in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and other bits and pieces you might want or need to know. Well, there's super thanks for a one and done donation to buy me a coffee or whatever, and memberships so you can Patreon without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been Aidan, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.